My name is Emma Carter. I was 25 years old, carrying my 11-month-old daughter down the shoulder of County Road 7 when my father's truck pulled up beside me. The July sun was brutal. My right knee throbbed with every step. Sophie's diaper bag hung from my shoulder, and I had no idea where I was going. Dad lowered the window. His eyes moved from my face to my swollen knee, then to Sophie, then back to me. "Emma," he said quietly, "where's your car?" For a second, I couldn't answer, because the truth sounded ridiculous. The kind of truth people don't believe until they live through it. Finally, I swallowed. My mother-in-law took it. Dad stared at me. 3 seconds. 4. Then he nodded. "Get in." I shifted Sophie higher on my hip. As I climbed into the truck, Dad looked at me and said 7 words I will never forget. "Get in. This ends tonight." At the time, he didn't know everything. He didn't know my mother-in-law had spent nearly a year slowly taking control of my life. He didn't know my phone had disappeared months earlier. He didn't know my husband had stopped acting like my partner and started acting like his mother's employee. And he definitely didn't know she was already preparing paperwork that could have taken my daughter away from me. But he was about to find out. The strange thing about control is that it rarely begins with cruelty. It begins with kindness, with favors, with help, with someone convincing you that every sacrifice is for your own good. That's exactly how Margaret Carter got me. 3 years earlier, my life looked completely different. I was 29 years old and working as a registered nurse at Valley Regional Medical Center. The hours were long, the work was exhausting, but I loved it. Helping people gave my life purpose, especially after losing my mother at 14. After she died, my father raised my younger brother and me alone. He worked hard, stayed strong, and taught me one lesson that shaped my entire life. Take responsibility. So I did. By the time I reached adulthood, independence felt natural. I paid my own bills, owned my own car, lived alone, and handled my own problems. Then I met Daniel Carter. He was easy to trust, funny, kind, the type of man who could make a stressful day feel lighter. We dated for nearly 2 years, and for most of that time, everything felt normal. Then he introduced me to his family. That's when I met Margaret. The first thing I noticed about her house was how perfect everything looked. Nothing was out of place. Nothing looked lived in. Everything felt controlled. Margaret opened the front door before we knocked, as if she'd been waiting for us. She smiled warmly. "Emma, I've heard so much about you." Dinner that night felt more like an interview than a family meal. Margaret asked about my job, my savings, my future plans, even my student loans. Meanwhile, Daniel's younger sister Rachel barely spoke. She just watched, observed, listened. After dinner, I offered to help clean up. Margaret smiled and lightly touched my arm. "You should always be grateful when people welcome you into their home." The comment wasn't rude, but something about it felt rehearsed, like she'd said it before, many times. I ignored the feeling. Looking back, I ignored a lot of warning signs. 8 months later, Daniel proposed. A year after that, we got married. The wedding was beautiful. Small church, close friends, close family. My father walked me down the aisle. My brother gave a speech that made everyone laugh, and Margaret sat in the front row, smiling proudly. For a while, everything seemed perfect. Then 3 days after our honeymoon, Daniel suggested something. "Mom thinks we should stay with her for a few months." I looked up. "What?" "We could save money for a house." Financially, it made sense. No rent, no utility bills, a chance to save quickly. Emotionally, I wasn't sure. But I trusted my husband, so we moved in. The first few weeks were pleasant. Margaret cooked, helped with laundry, made coffee every morning. She acted like the perfect mother-in-law. Whenever I thanked her, she always said the same thing. Family takes care of family. At first, it sounded comforting. Then I noticed something. Every favor came with expectations. Every act of kindness created a small obligation, and every obligation reduced my independence a little more. One afternoon, I couldn't find my car keys. I searched everywhere. Eventually, Margaret handed them to me. I moved them for safekeeping. A week later, it happened again. Then again. Then again. Eventually, she stopped apologizing and started acting like controlling access to my car was perfectly normal. The first time I complained, Daniel immediately defended her. Mom's just trying to help. Help. That word became the soundtrack of my life. Every boundary violation was help. Every interference was help. Every decision made without me was help. And before I realized what was happening, I had started giving up pieces of my independence, one piece at a time. Then everything got worse. Because 6 months later, I found out I was pregnant. At first, I thought the baby would bring everyone closer together. Instead, my pregnancy gave Margaret a new reason to involve herself in every part of my life. The announcement happened during Sunday dinner. Daniel was excited. I was nervous. Margaret cried. Real tears. She hugged me tightly and said something I would never forget. My grandbaby is finally coming home. At the time, it sounded harmless. Months later, I realized it wasn't. Because Margaret wasn't talking about my child, she was talking about what she believed belonged to her. And I wouldn't understand how dangerous that belief was until it was almost too late. For the first few weeks, Margaret seemed like the perfect grandmother. She bought pregnancy books, recommended doctors, cooked healthy meals, and constantly reminded everyone how excited she was for the baby. Most people thought I was lucky. Maybe I thought so too, at least in the beginning. But slowly, little things started changing. The first sign appeared around my 3rd month of pregnancy. Dad stopped calling as often, or at least that's what I thought. We had always talked regularly, maybe not every day, but enough. Then suddenly weeks passed without hearing from him. One Sunday afternoon, I walked into the kitchen just as Margaret hung up the phone. She smiled. "Your father called." I stopped. "When?" "A few minutes ago." "Why didn't you get me?" Margaret shrugged. "You were resting." Something felt wrong. That evening, I called Dad from my cell phone. His response shocked me. "I've been calling every Sunday." I sat up straighter. "What?" "I thought you were avoiding me." My stomach dropped. "How many times have you called?" There was a pause. Then Dad answered. "Almost every week for 2 months." 2 months. I slowly looked toward the living room where Margaret was watching television. For the first time, I wondered how many conversations she had hidden from me, and how many more she planned to hide. That night I confronted Daniel. He barely looked away from his phone. "Mom was probably trying not to bother you." I stared at him. "She kept calls from my father from me." Daniel sighed. "I'm sure she meant well." Those 4 words were becoming exhausting. No matter what happened, no matter what Margaret did, the answer was always the same. Mom means well. Meanwhile, the pregnancy continued, and by month 5, Margaret had started interfering with my work. One afternoon, my supervisor called. "Emma, are you planning to start maternity leave early?" I frowned. "No." There was a pause. "Your mother-in-law called yesterday." My grip tightened around the phone. According to my supervisor, Margaret had explained that my pregnancy was becoming difficult and that I needed lighter duties. She had contacted my employer without permission, without asking me, without even telling me. I drove home furious. The moment I walked through the door, I found Margaret in the kitchen. "Why did you call my supervisor?" Margaret blinked, then smiled. "Oh, that," as if it were nothing. "I was helping." No, you weren't. The smile faded slightly. I was concerned. You don't get to make decisions about my job. For a moment, the room became very quiet. Then Margaret tilted her head. The expression on her face changed. Concern replaced confidence. Emma, are you feeling stressed lately? I froze. The question sounded innocent, but it didn't feel innocent, not even close. Looking back, I think that was the moment she realized I was becoming difficult to control, because I had finally started pushing back, and Margaret didn't like resistance. A week later, another problem appeared: my phone. At first, it seemed like a technical issue. The battery died quickly. Applications opened on their own. Settings changed without explanation. Then one evening, I checked the device settings. What I found made my stomach twist. A location-sharing application was running constantly. I had never installed it. I had never used it. Yet somehow, it had access to everything. I deleted it immediately. The next morning, Rachel confronted me. Not asked, confronted. You removed something from your phone. I stared at her. How would you know that? For a split second, she looked nervous. Then Margaret stepped in. Nobody is spying on you, Emma. The fact that she immediately used the word spying told me everything, because I had never said that word, not once. That afternoon, I sat alone in the backyard, pregnant, confused, trying to understand what was happening. For the first time since moving into Margaret's house, I seriously considered leaving, just temporarily, finding a small apartment, getting some space, getting my independence back. That evening, I mentioned the idea to Daniel. His reaction was immediate. Move out? Just until the baby comes. Why? I hesitated, because I didn't know how to explain something that felt wrong but didn't look wrong. Finally, I said the truth. I feel like I don't have any privacy. Daniel shook his head. You're overthinking things. There it was again, dismissal. Every concern I raised somehow became my problem, not Margaret's. By the time we went to bed, the conversation was over, but something important had changed. For the first time in our marriage, I felt completely alone. Then, 1 month later, Sophie arrived. And the moment she entered the world, everything changed. Because Margaret stopped trying to control me. She started trying to replace me. And that was when the real nightmare began. The day Sophie was born should have been one of the happiest days of my life. And for a little while, it was. The moment the nurse placed her in my arms, everything else disappeared. The noise, the exhaustion, the fear. None of it mattered. All I could see was my daughter. Tiny fingers, dark hair, bright eyes. Perfect. For the first hour, nothing else existed. Then Margaret arrived. Nobody had called her. Nobody had invited her. Yet somehow she walked into the room less than an hour after Sophie was born. The first thing she said wasn't directed at me, it was directed at Sophie. My beautiful girl. Then she reached for her. I hesitated, only for a second, but everyone around me was smiling. Daniel looked happy. The nurses looked happy. So I handed Sophie over. That decision haunted me later, because from that moment forward, Margaret acted less like a grandmother and more like a second mother. Within weeks, she was involved in everything: feeding schedules, sleep schedules, doctor appointments, bath times, nap times. Every decision somehow became her decision. One morning, I walked downstairs and found a detailed chart taped to the refrigerator. Sophie's name was written across the top. Feeding times, sleeping times, medication notes, daily observations. The thing looked more like a medical chart than a family schedule. I stared at it. Margaret smiled proudly. Now everyone knows exactly what Sophie needs. Everyone, except the person who should have been making those decisions. Me. When I pointed that out, Margaret laughed softly. Oh, honey, I'm only helping. Helping. Always helping. I was beginning to hate that word. The following months became increasingly strange. Friends stopped visiting. Neighbors stopped checking in. People who used to text suddenly disappeared. At first I thought everyone was simply busy. Then, one afternoon, I overheard Rachel talking on the phone. She didn't know I was nearby. "I'm honestly worried about Emma." I stopped walking. Rachel continued, "She's not really herself anymore." There was a pause, then she added, "Margaret's doing everything she can." I stood frozen in the hallway, listening, unable to believe what I was hearing. That night I barely slept, because suddenly everything made sense. People weren't avoiding me. They were avoiding the version of me Margaret and Rachel had created, the unstable version, the struggling version, the helpless version, a version that wasn't real, and people believed it. A few days later, I discovered just how far things had gone. Rachel accidentally left her phone on the kitchen counter. The screen lit up. Normally I wouldn't have looked, but what I saw made my stomach drop. A photograph of me, holding Sophie, looking exhausted. The caption read, "Didn't shower today." A second notification appeared. Another photo. Another note. My pulse quickened. Something felt very wrong. When Rachel left the room, I picked up the phone. What I found nearly knocked the air out of me. There were dozens of photographs. Pictures of me carrying Sophie. Pictures of me crying after sleepless nights. Pictures of me looking exhausted. Pictures taken without my knowledge. Every image had notes attached. Observations, comments, dates. Like someone was documenting evidence or building a case. Suddenly all the rumors made sense. The concern, the comments about my mental health, the strange looks from church members. None of it was random. They were creating a story about me, and they wanted everyone else to believe it. That night, I started a notebook. Nothing complicated, just facts, dates, times, events. The same way I documented patient information at work. November 4th, Rachel photographed me without consent. November 8th, Margaret intercepted call from father. November 12th, discussion regarding my mental health initiated without cause. Simple, professional, objective. At first I wrote for my own sanity. I needed proof that I wasn't imagining things, but the more I documented, the clearer the pattern became. Every road led back to Margaret. Every incident connected somehow. Every piece fit together. Then came the discovery that changed everything. One Thursday morning, Margaret left for Bible study. Daniel was working. Rachel was out shopping. For the first time in months, I was completely alone. Sophie was asleep upstairs. The house was silent. I should have been cleaning. Instead, I found myself standing outside Margaret's study, the room she always kept locked, the room nobody else was allowed to enter. Something told me the answers were inside. I didn't know how right I was. A few months earlier, I had noticed Margaret hide a small key beneath the kitchen junk drawer. At the time, it seemed unimportant. Now, it suddenly mattered. I walked downstairs, opened the drawer, moved aside batteries and old receipts, and there it was, the key, exactly where she'd hidden it. My hands were trembling as I carried it upstairs. The lock clicked, the drawer opened, and my entire world changed. The first thing I saw was my car title, my car, the same car Margaret kept claiming was tied up in paperwork. The title had been sitting in her desk the entire time. But that wasn't the worst part. Beneath it sat a thick manila folder. I opened it. My stomach dropped. At the very top was a legal document. Petition for temporary emergency custody. Sophie's name appeared on the first page. My daughter's name. For several seconds I couldn't breathe. Then I kept reading. According to the petition, I was emotionally unstable, unable to care for my child, a risk to Sophie's well-being. The supporting evidence included photographs, witness statements, personal observations. Everything suddenly made sense. The rumors, the photos, the isolation, the intercepted calls. Margaret hadn't been trying to help me. She had been building a case against me for months. And standing in that study, holding those papers in my hands, I realized something terrifying. I was running out of time. Because if Margaret filed first, I might lose my daughter before I ever got the chance to fight back. I carefully returned every document to exactly where I had found it: the custody petition, the photographs, the witness statements, even my car title. Then I locked the drawer, returned the key, and walked away. But nothing felt the same anymore. For months, I had been trying to understand Margaret. Now I finally did. She wasn't trying to help me. She wasn't trying to protect Sophie. She was trying to replace me. That night I barely slept, because I understood something terrifying. If Margaret filed first, I would spend months defending myself, maybe longer. I couldn't afford to wait. The next morning, I contacted an attorney. Her name was Rebecca Stone, a family law attorney who specialized in coercive control cases. Over the next few days, I secretly shared everything with her: the notebook, the photographs, the custody petition, the hidden car title, every detail. When Rebecca finished reviewing everything, she leaned back in her chair. Then she said something that changed my life. "Emma, you need to leave immediately. Not next month, not next week, immediately. Because Margaret was preparing to act, and once she acted, things could become much harder." Unfortunately, Margaret seemed to sense something had changed. She started watching me constantly, checking where I went, questioning everything I did. Then one evening, I overheard a phone conversation. I was walking past the study when I heard Margaret's voice through the door. "I think we should file this week." A pause. Then, "before she does something unexpected." My blood ran cold. The clock had officially run out. The following morning I woke before everyone else. I packed a small bag: diapers, formula, clothes, my notebook, evidence, everything I would need. The plan was simple: take Sophie, leave quietly, call Rebecca, get somewhere safe. I picked Sophie up from her crib, held her close, and walked downstairs. I was halfway to the front door when Daniel stepped into my path. "Where are you going?" "For a walk." His expression tightened. "Mom says you should stay home today." I stared at him. Then I tried to move around him. Daniel grabbed my arm, hard. My foot slipped. Pain exploded through my knee. I twisted instinctively to protect Sophie as I fell. She immediately started crying. The entire house froze. Daniel released my arm. His face turned white. I didn't wait for the rest. I grabbed Sophie, opened the front door, and walked away. 20 minutes later, I was limping down County Road 7, carrying my daughter. I had no plan, no destination, only one certainty: I wasn't going back. Then I heard an engine behind me, a familiar engine, Dad's truck. It slowed beside me. The passenger window rolled down. He looked at me, then at Sophie, then at my swollen knee. Finally, he asked, "Where's your car?" I swallowed. "My mother-in-law took it." Dad stared at me for several seconds, then nodded. "Get in." I climbed into the truck. Dad pulled back onto the road. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. Then he looked over and said 7 words that changed everything. "Get in. This ends tonight." That evening, I told him everything, absolutely everything. The notebook sat between us on the kitchen table. Dad read every page, every entry, every date, every detail. When he finished, he closed the notebook, then looked at me. For the first time in nearly a year, I felt completely believed. The next morning, Rebecca filed emergency motions, temporary custody, protective orders, supporting evidence, everything. The hearing was scheduled immediately. When I entered the courtroom, Margaret was already there, perfectly dressed, perfectly composed, as if she were attending a social event instead of a custody hearing. Her attorney presented their case first. According to them, Margaret was simply a concerned grandmother, a loving family member worried about Sophie's safety. The photographs were introduced. Witness statements were introduced. Letters questioning my mental health were introduced. For a few moments, it sounded convincing. Then Rebecca stood, and everything changed. She introduced my notebook. 52 documented entries, everyone dated, everyone organized, everyone supported by evidence. The courtroom became quieter with every page. The pattern was impossible to ignore. Isolation, control, surveillance, manipulation. Then Rebecca presented the photographs I had taken from Margaret's desk, the custody petition, the hidden car title, the supporting documents. Margaret's expression finally changed. For the first time, she looked nervous. Then came the moment that destroyed her case. Rebecca questioned the physician whose letter supported Margaret's petition. One simple question changed everything. "Doctor, are you qualified to diagnose the condition referenced in this document?" The answer was no. The courtroom fell silent. A few minutes later, the judge delivered his decision. Margaret's custody petition was denied. Immediately. The medical claims weren't credible. The evidence wasn't sufficient. The supporting documentation was deeply flawed. Then the judge turned to my petition. Temporary custody of Sophie was granted to me. Protective restrictions were approved, and my vehicle was ordered returned. Just like that. Months of control collapsed in less than an hour. Outside the courtroom, Daniel tried to apologize. For a moment, I looked at the man I had once trusted with my future. Then I realized something. He hadn't protected me. He hadn't listened. And when it mattered most, he hadn't chosen us. Some choices arrived too late. I walked away. Dad was waiting outside holding Sophie. The moment he saw me smile, he smiled too. That small smile said everything. We were safe. A few months later, Sophie and I moved into a small apartment. Nothing fancy, just ours. The first thing I installed was a simple key hook beside the front door. Then I hung my car keys on it. The same keys Margaret had controlled for nearly a year. Every time I looked at them, I remembered something important. Freedom rarely disappears all at once. It disappears one compromise at a time, one excuse at a time, one favor at a time, until one day you realize someone else is living your life for you. But freedom can return too, one decision at a time, one step at a time, one act of courage at a time, and sometimes it begins with a father pulling his truck to the side of the road and saying 7 simple words. Get in. This ends tonight. The last time I saw Margaret was almost a year later. I was loading groceries into my car when I noticed her across the parking lot. For a second, our eyes met. She looked older, smaller somehow. Not because she had changed, because I had. For the first time, I wasn't afraid of disappointing her. I wasn't afraid of her opinion. I wasn't afraid of losing her approval. I got into my car, buckled Sophie into her seat, and drove home. My life, my choices. And that was something Margaret could never take from me again.